it's that garage fridge lifestyle, right? Like if you got that garage fridge, forget income as a metric. Do you have a garage fridge? Welcome to the Costco Club.
1, 2, 3.
Coming up, Jack Richardson is back on the pod to talk about Thrive Market in our latest in our strategy series. The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by American Ag Credit. American Ag Credit is a proud member of the Farm Credit System, which was created more than 100 years ago with the sole purpose of serving the financial needs of farmers and ranchers. From small farms to the largest agribusiness enterprises, American Ag Credit understands agriculture and how to structure customized financial solutions. Just like many of the guests we have on the pod, American Ag Credit recognizes that the evolution of agriculture is inevitable and exciting. Their goal is to be at the forefront of this evolution, partnering with producers to grow their future in ways they haven't imagined yet. To learn more about American Ag Credit and to receive exclusive access to reports from Terrain, a research and insight service of American Ag Credit, visit agloan.com/terrain or check the link in our show notes. All right, guys, we're going to jump into this conversation with Jack. Thrive Market, really cool business and business model. And we dive into why that is. One thing we didn't mention with Jack that's worth calling out is just the membership aspect of Thrive's model. So very similar to Costco, where members, to purchase from Thrive, you need to be a member. And those membership fees are profit on top of the margin they make on their products. This is core to the Costco business model, where they have really low margin to benefit their customers, but they make those membership fees are really pure profit. And so Thrive has that benefit as well. We get into other areas of the business model and dynamics, but worth calling that out before we jump in and start the conversation with Jack. Jack, welcome back to the pod. We're excited to talk about Thrive Market today. It's timely. My wife just placed a Thrive order yesterday, so this is top of mind for me. She was, on the bed with her laptop saying, doing a Thrive order. What do you want? And what was my first reaction? Can anyone guess? What was top of my list?
Meat sticks.
I like the guess. It was Element electrolyte packs.
There you go.
We can never drop below 0 in inventory in this house, because then my throat starts getting tight. Just knowing that we don't have the Element electrolyte packs in the house stresses me out. It's actually stressing me out right now. So anyway, Thrive, top of mind for me. Really interesting business. Jack, why did you decide to talk about Thrive? And maybe you can share a little bit more about kind of what was in the newsletter.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, Tim and Ty, for having me on. So I've been a member of Thrive Market since late 2019. So I simply stated, just love this company, love the products they sell, the ease of navigating their website. I've been following their progress, listening to podcasts that Nick Green, their founder and CEO, has been on over the last number of years. So it's really exciting to couple me being an avid customer of theirs with kind of digging into the business. The newsletter itself kind of dug into a couple different components. It was pretty math heavy, so I do encourage listeners to check out the newsletter itself for a couple succinct tables I put together. The 3 sections I covered were a per member spend, what your average Thrive customer, the average Thrive member spends at Thrive per year, and I did that in relationship to Costco. And then drilling a little more granular, what drives sales? Well, sales is a component of your number of members, and then within each member, how many trips per year they purchase from Thrive, multiplied by the average selling price of each unit, multiplied by the average units in a basket. So trips per year was kind of the second section. And then the third was member segmentation in the acquired podcast episode in which they spoke about Costco. They did an executive member versus a gold member segmentation, and I used those data points to extrapolate that across Thrive's customers. And I will say, with me being a member for coming up on 5 years and shopping at Thrive almost every other week, I think I would place pretty highly in the loyal member segment.
Yeah, I think we're all on opposite ends of the spectrum with Thrive. I've done one order and churned after one. I just have too many. There's too many options. It's hard to kind of like pick one and stick with it. I know Ty uses it as well. So it's gonna be interesting to chat more about this business. But maybe to start out, Jack, just maybe talk a little bit about Thrive, like how they're different from other retailers and kind of the role they play in food distribution, working with CPG brands, getting into consumers' hands, as well as like the agriculture system at large.
Yeah, absolutely. So Thrive, it can be thought of as Whole Foods plus Costco plus e-commerce. So they are e-commerce only. They are vertically integrated. So they are differentiated from an Instacart or a Fresh Direct in that regard. They do not work with established brick and mortar retailers. They own their supply chain, their distribution centers. They can be thought of as Costco because they do offer more bulk purchases. And with Whole Foods, you can find many of the same brands you would see in Whole Foods on Thrive. And something Thrive has prioritized in years past is building more and more of their own private label. So that is some form of differentiation as well as the cost savings. So if you're to buy, the cacao nibs from Navitas, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the brand, on Thrive, then that's generally going to be significantly cheaper than you would buy it at Whole Foods.
Yeah, it's one of these interesting scenarios where you say, hey, I've got a business idea. It's take Costco and Whole Foods and slap some e-commerce on it. It's like, did you just describe the perfect business? But I also think that, one of Thrive's challenges is where does it fit in? If you're not perfectly a direct competitor to Costco or to Whole Foods, like where does that fit in? And I think that's kind of like really interesting where they've carved out a niche, but they also aren't necessarily a replacement for each of the other companies that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a couple high-level stats about Thrive. They're doing more than $500 million in revenue today. They have 1.2 million paid members. Their mission is to democratize healthy food for everyone, improving the affordability and accessibility. So the way they approach that is for every paid membership, which is $60 a year, they gift a free membership to a family in need. And then 2, because their whole ethos is generating savings, when you're at the checkout page on Thrive, you'll be prompted to read, oh, by shopping on Thrive, you have saved, let's say, $17. You can gift X% of those $17 to a family in need.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. In kind of looking at their website before jumping on this call, like notice that they don't really offer fresh produce, and kind of like curious how you guys both deal with that. If you're buying groceries from Thrive, you're having to basically do multiple trips to get that fresh produce, and common in retail that fresh produce is one of the highest margin items in the grocery store. So is Thrive missing out by not being able to merchandise fresh produce, being only e-commerce?
I'll relate that to one form of analysis I did in the newsletter, which resulted in your average Costco member shopping Costco 25 times per year, whereas your average Thrive member only shops Thrive 3.7 times per year. I think a big reason, if not the big reason why average Thrive members don't shop Thrive more often is because, exactly to your point, Tim, they do not offer fresh produce. It is actually my recommendation, my thinking, that they should not. They should continue to not offer fresh produce. Obviously, perishability becomes a big concern. Tim, you and I know that well from our time at Appeal. But just look more broadly, and there are market headwinds within the D2C fresh produce delivery space. Misfit markets and imperfect foods merging in years past. Those were kind of darling ag tech players a number of years ago, but that market has cooled.
Jack, one thing you brought up to us is the idea that Thrive is actually a major regenerative CPG player. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's some further stats. Thrive is offering around 6,000 SKUs. And I'll make one other point of why Thrive is so similar to Costco. Costco offers, as I recall, around 4,500 to 5,000 SKUs, whereas a Walmart will offer an order of magnitude more SKUs. So Thrive, like Costco, has a highly curated offering. So out of Thrive's 6,000 SKUs that they offer, when I type in regenerative in their search bar, that results in 373 unique results. And kind of back the napkin math, I quoted that as 57 of those 373 unique results are Thrive's private label products that are regenerative. Now, just to qualify, that's not to say all 57 or all 373 are regenerative organic certified, or has one of the other regenerative certifications, but in some form or way, they're promoting regenerative agriculture. Now, the three of us are, to varying degrees connected within the regen space. And I frankly almost never hear Thrive Market talked in those regen circles. But I think that will change in the years to come as Thrive becomes an even more prominent player in accelerating demand for regeneratively grown products.
Yeah, it's a super interesting point. I think oftentimes with CPG getting into retail, like shelf space is just a huge concern where you can only feature so many brands, but being totally e-commerce, they're not constrained by having a certain amount of space on the shelf to feature new and novel brands. So I think it's an interesting kind of alternative outlet to get broader distribution outside of going just through Amazon or trying to sell directly through your website. Going through a channel partner like Thrive can make a lot of sense for some of these up and coming CPG regen brands. Jack, you've talked a lot about kind of the ethos and mission behind Thrive. You mentioned prior to the call that they have a scorecard to kind of grade themselves. Maybe talk a little bit about what you learned there.
So kind of alluded to this to varying degrees. Thrive's mission is to democratize healthy food for everyone. Now, in one regard, Thrive could simply be stealing share from Whole Foods. And take me as an example. Used to live in San Francisco, now live in New York, predominantly shop at Whole Foods, and also shop at Thrive. So if all 1.2 million of Thrive's members were like myself, then yes, Thrive still has a $500 million business, but they're not necessarily executing against their mission. But it was really encouraging to see that this is actually not the case, that Nick Green, the CEO, was quoted in a recent article that more than half of Thrive's members live in the Southeast or the Midwest. Now, why is that relevant? Well, when you compare the footprint of both Whole Foods and Sprout stores, only 17% of those retailer stores are in those same regions, the Midwest and Southeast. So that's to say that people that don't have easy access to those natural grocers can readily turn to Thrive Market.
I think it's a super cool part of the mission, right? And I think that's probably, I wouldn't have had that conclusion, right? Just looking on the surface. And I think that's really cool, right? Because this is something that is a real issue, is food deserts, right? Where there's people living in areas where there's not access to whole foods, local, and just clean foods, right? More Thrive's target products. So I think that's super interesting. All right, let's move to the 7 Powers section. So we did this in our initial podcast with Maui Nui, and basically the 7 Powers are business advantages that companies that can sustain profits over a long time have at least one of these powers. It's business advantages. So let's talk about Thrive, what kind of advantages they have as a business with their business model and positioning. Jack, what kind of came to mind when you thought about them through the lens of the 7 Powers?
So there are 3 powers that I believe Thrive possesses, the first of which is process power. And I'll give a recap of the definition of process power. Process power is a business whose organization and activity set enables lower costs and or superior products that can only be matched by an extended commitment. The reason why I think Thrive possesses process power is because of that enables a lower cost component. They are offering many of the same products you can buy at Whole Foods or Sprouts, and yet they are at a significant discount, which really speaks to Thrive only being online, skipping the brick and mortar step, being vertically integrated, working with brands to lower their costs, offering higher quantity items, ultimately allowing Thrive to pass along those savings to their members.
What's next, Jack? What's the next power law?
So this is an exciting one, counter positioning. And again, we'll start with the definition. Counter positioning is a business adopts a new superior business model that incumbents cannot mimic due to the anticipated cannibalization of their existing business. And I'm going to relate this to the Costco episode on Acquired, because they also posited Costco possessing counter positioning, which they very do. Now, the way they approached that was Costco's average member has an income of $125,000. Relate that to another national retailer, Walmart, whose average customer instead has an average income of $80,000. So ultimately, those guys at Acquired said that Costco offers the lowest price goods, but they have the wealthiest consumers out of major retailers. Now, why is that important in the context of Costco? It's important because Costco members need to have more money, more cash on hand for those big bulk purchases. And then two, when they get home, they need to have the storage space at home to store those big bulk purchases. If we were to look at the average income for your Whole Foods member, I assume that person would be also in the six figures. But in that same article in which Nick at Thrive stated that half of their customers live in the Southeast or Midwest, he also stated that Thrive's average member has an income of $75,000, which really does counterposition Thrive well against Whole Foods.
It's that garage fridge lifestyle, right? Like if you got that garage fridge, forget income as a metric. Do you have a garage fridge? Welcome to the Costco club, okay? Because it's critical. It's critical. No, I think that's really fascinating, and the more you talk through it, the more I do see that Thrive kind of fills their specific niche, and there is some overlap, but they're really serving a customer segment that is distinct, and I think that's really interesting. All right, what's the last one?
The last one is branding. Now, the definition of branding is a business that enjoys a higher perceived value to an objectively identical offering due to historical information about them. And for this power, we'll compare Thrive to that of Amazon. Now, this might be a personal bias, my personal take. Shopping on Amazon, very clunky, don't love the UI. If I were to type cacao nibs into Amazon, get dozens and dozens of results, not only from the brand selling cacao nibs, but also just a plethora of resellers. Now, why I think Thrive possesses branding, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, similar to Costco, Thrive's merchandise team curates the choice. They take the onus of choice away from the consumer and instead only offer a few different cacao nib choices. I think it was 2 or 3 when I checked. And so what that high level of curation results in, it results in trust. It results in trust in the Thrive brand.
No, I think this makes a lot of sense, right? Because to your point, I want cacao nibs, and I'm an Amazon customer. My wife and I are also Thrive customers. I would start with Thrive for sure for that exact point. And I think that's the definition of one of these powers, right? It's like all things being equal, there's two companies to choose from. Which am I going to turn to and why? And so I think that's really compelling.
Yeah, I think they've done a good job of kind of building trust with consumers. Like when you go on their website, it's kind of very reputable brands where they've done their diligence on auditing these vendors and suppliers. And like other grocery stores, that's not the same, where you go in a Safeway or a grocery outlet and you got to be a little bit more selective as a consumer if you're really conscious about that kind of stuff, on where did this come from, how is it grown, how is it produced. Where Thrive, I think off the bat with their branding and messaging, you can kind of see that they've done a lot of that work for the consumer.
Jack, what's next for Thrive? Like any areas of like growth or emphasis? You mentioned like fresh produce and probably that not making sense. I mean, where do they go next?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of how I think about how to grow sales, and it really should be tailored to your audience. If you're just talking to investors or a company all hands, maybe your goal is we are slated to grow 80% this year, but that actually is lacking kind of all the important context. So in this case, I think it really should be boiled down to, is Thrive prioritizing growing member count, decreasing churn in existing members, or increasing the average spend for those existing members. And yes, they should be pushing against all those initiatives. They have low seven-figure members, so obviously there's a lot of runway for them to continue to grow with the membership count. I think especially in communities that don't have a Whole Foods or a Sprouts or some local natural grocer nearby. And then within the actual existing members, I actually do not believe that Thrive should offer fresh produce. That will result in Thrive never being a customer's number one or number two retailer. But from a profitability perspective, I think that enables Thrive to continue to grow profitably while being a market share leader in the shelf-stable goods space.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think they're positioned well to be kind of like a tool in the toolkit for consumers to do their shopping to get majority of their household goods, but you're always going to need a couple other options to kind of round out your shopping for the week.
Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation around Thrive Market, the strategy behind the business model. If you like this kind of conversation and thinking about business model and business strategy, check out our newsletter. Jack writes a new edition about every month about a new business or topic focused on strategy. And we discuss those newsletters on the podcast as well. It's kind of the whole play-by-play on the newsletter and the color commentary, if you will, on the podcast. So if you haven't already subscribed to the newsletter, check out the edition on Thrive if you missed that, and make sure you're subscribed for future editions coming up. The link is in the show notes, and we will talk to you guys next week back on the pod.